Hawke heads a star-studded cast in the midweek movie on 2 in a moment, Conduct Unbecoming. Here on 1 at 9:25 we begin a new love story, Mr. Right. First the 9 o'clock news with Michael Burke.
Force 8 in the North Sea as Danish trawlers head for a showdown with the British. Captain Kirk's mission to boldly go where no Dane should go anymore. A killer holds an assistant governor of Parkhurst at knife point. Get out and push. Zimbabwe runs out of petrol. And Randall hits back to give England an outside chance of the Ashes. Good evening. More than 100 Danish trawlers are battling through Force 8 gales in the North Sea tonight, some of them heading for our fishing grounds and possible confrontation with British patrols. Their government has warned them against trying to test the new British fishing regulations, but some seem determined to fish inside our territorial waters, risking a £50,000 fine and the confiscation of their gear. Already tonight, one Danish trawler has been intercepted by the British protection vessel Vigilant inside the disputed zone off the Shetland Islands. The Danish boat had its nets out, but its skipper claimed he was doing industrial fishing, allowed under the regulations. The weather was too bad for the British ship to confirm the Danish skipper's claim, but a boarding party may be sent to examine the trawler in the morning. 6 fishery protection vessels are now on patrol. From HMS Alderney, Jeremy Hans reports.
The Navy and the Ministry insist that fisheries patrolling will go on exactly as normal for the time being at least. Ships like HMS Alderney are not on a special lookout for Danish trawlers, nor will there be any harassment or overzealous searches if any are found. All trawlers, British and foreign, that are spotted inside the 200-mile limit will be checked out and possibly boarded by the Navy for an inspection of catches and equipment.
We are certainly aware, obviously, of the new legislation which affects fishing in our area, and that applies to a large extent to the Danes. But we are not out to look for Danes in particular. We are doing our normal patrol, albeit very much conscious of the new law which concerns the Danes in their fishing in our areas.
But with winds up to force 10 blasting the North Sea, the fishing grounds are relatively empty. This French trawler had had enough and was butting its way homeward. The man who leads the boarding parties from HMS Alderney is Lieutenant Mike Wright. He's gone aboard several Danish trawlers inside the last year.
The basic problems we come across are the weather. Like the present weather blowing a Force 8, it's very difficult to get on board. And indeed, not all fishing vessels lower ladders for you.
HMS Alderney is a 1,500-ton fishery protection ship patrolling the east coast of Scotland with HMS Jersey and 2 ships of the Scottish Department of Fisheries. Other vessels are patrolling elsewhere, and RAF Nimrod aircraft are operating too. But until this afternoon, none had seen a Danish trawler since the new year. And then HMS Alderney intercepted this trawler with its nets out and rolling heavily in the swell. It was far too rough to attempt a boarding, and Alderney's captain accepted the Dane's word that he was not fishing for mackerel or that he'd hauled his nets since leaving port. The trawler was left to wallow with an empty hold, and HMS Alderney moved on.
Among the trawler skippers setting sail from Esbjerg today was Danish Euro MP Kent Kirk. He's determined to challenge Britain's decision to exclude Danish trawlers from British territorial waters. In fact, he wants to get himself arrested. Michael Cole was among the newsmen he took with him on his trawler, the Sandkirk.
The Danish authorities made a determined attempt to stop the trawler leaving. Officials arrived to carry out a surprise safety check. The Sandkirk's owner, Kent Kirk, hurried to his boat as life rafts were checked and rechecked. He'd intended to take 32 British reporters, photographers and camera crews with him as he breached Britain's 12-mile limit. The safety men threw off the extra life preservers and limited the passenger list to 12. Kent Kirk said he was determined to go ahead, despite the Danish fishery minister's statement that his voyage was provocative.
Yes, I'm still going to get ahead because the fishing minister haven't been calling me, and I'm a very close friend to him, so if he really had the opinion that I have to stay at home and it was in the best interest for all of us in the common market, then of course he would have called me.
And you think this will have a positive result?
I'm sure it will have a positive result, yes.
The Danes are taking a light-hearted view so far. This cartoon shows a British officer briefing his forces. The enemy hasn't got any Exocet missiles, he says, only Viking stubbornness. But Kent Kirk refused a Viking helmet offered by the Danish press. He said this was not a publicity stunt. Instead, he chose a quote from a famous British admiral, Nelson.
Denmark expect every man to do his duty now.
Mr. Kirk is prepared to state his case in a British court if he's arrested. For the British authorities, this voyage presents a particular dilemma. Whether to arrest Kent Kirk and give the photographers a field day, or turn a blind eye and give him the propaganda victory, which would make him into a Danish national hero.
Within the last hour, we've heard again from Michael Cole. He's now well out into the North Sea in the middle of a gale where conditions made broadcasting difficult.
We're now 60 miles out of Esbjerg and in a force 8 gale. This trawler suddenly seems very small indeed. It is pitching and tossing in a most alarming manner. Virtually all the newsmen on board have been sick, including myself, and the sight of the British coast will never be more welcome. People are trying to sleep or just trying to hold on to something that isn't moving. But for his part, the owner, Kent Kirk, is feeling fine. He's had dinner and he's looking forward to getting to the British coast on time on Thursday, when he says he will shoot his nets in defiance of British regulations.
Britain's enforcement of the fishing limits could lead to trouble with the European Court. That's because the various national measures imposed by the common market countries in the absence of a common fisheries policy haven't yet been endorsed by the EEC Commission. The Commission's due to meet in Brussels tomorrow to do just that. But if there's any delay and Danish fishermen are arrested, the European Court could well rule in their favour and against the British government. At Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight, an assistant governor is still being held hostage tonight after more than 10 hours by 2 inmates armed with a knife. One of those who seized the assistant governor, Mr. Jerry Schofield, was named as John Thomas Bowden, aged 26, who was sentenced to life for murder at the Old Bailey a year ago. The other man is John McCaig, 27, serving 4 years for robbery. At Bowden's trial, the court heard that he was one of 3 men who cut up their victim while he was still alive. Bowden was said to have told police he would rather hang than serve his full sentence. The judge, Mr. Justice Mars Jones, said there never was a more horrific case of murder than this one. One of the prisoners carrying a knife entered the assistant governor's office, which is open for inmates to discuss their problems, at 10:45 this morning. The other prisoner then helped to seize Mr. Schofield. They asked to speak to a lawyer and their wives. At one time, they threatened to kill Mr. Schofield unless their demands were met, but the deadline passed without the threat being carried out. And we've just heard that the assistant governor, Mr. Schofield, has spoken twice to his wife since he was taken hostage. He said no one had been hurt during the incident. Police in West Yorkshire are hunting a man whom they believe has committed 2 violent sexual attacks on women in the past few days. In the latest incident, a young mother was kidnapped, raped, and then thrown into a canal bound hand and foot. Judith Stamper reports.
The second of 2 vicious sex attacks in West Yorkshire began last night outside the General Infirmary in Leeds. A 20-year-old woman was attacked, tied up, and driven in her own car for about 10 miles. She was then attacked again and raped. Her attacker drove her back to Leeds and dumped her, still tied up, into the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. Miraculously, the woman untied herself and crawled out alive, but for her speedy action, the police say they'd have a murder on their hands. The man they're looking for is between 25 and 35, with brown collar-length hair and a distinct Scottish accent.
Only a few weeks before last night's assault, another woman, aged about 30, was attacked in a Bradford car park. Again, she was tied and bound, driven away in her own car, raped and then driven back again. But on this occasion, the assailant met with a police traffic cordon attending to an accident. He panicked, it said, ran away and left the woman still tied and bound in the back of the car. The police are linking the two incidents and say that no woman in West Yorkshire is safe until the man is found.
Sending a letter by first-class mail is going to cost more in the spring. The post office will charge 16.5 pence from April the 5th, an increase of a penny. But a second-class stamp used on 3/5 of inland letters will stay at 12.5 pence. That price was frozen last February, and the post office say they'll keep it that way for as long as possible. British Airways are to make 1,500 more staff redundant in their drive for profitability. 500 of the redundancies will be at managerial level. The state-owned airline has now shed more than 20,000 employees in just 2 years. Tonight, the chairman warned that the latest cuts may not be the last. Our air correspondent Christopher Wayne reports.
In 1979, British Airways was the world's biggest airline in terms of manpower, with 59,000 on the payroll. Now that figure's down to 40,000, and by March it'll be 35,000. But only some of that final group have volunteered to leave. 1,500 will be made to go. For BA, the problem is to choose where to make the new cuts. The target is top management and higher paid staff earning about £20,000 a year. Although some departments of British Airways have been trimmed by 40%, so far only 10% of management staff has been cut. So it looks as if 500 of the airline's 1,300 managers will be made to go. British Airways say they don't differentiate between managers and workers. The key factor is to get the airline down to a size where it can survive. So is the target figure of 35,000 going to be enough, or will others find their jobs at risk?
It's as far as it goes with the present level of trade. If that alters, if the recession continues, and we do not have a volume of traffic to support the 35,000, which we hope we will have, then of course we have to look at it again. I hope not.
Sir John's ultimate aim is to make British Airways profitable enough to sell off to the private sector. He's already turned last year's loss of £544 million into an £80 million profit for the first half of this financial year. They're hoping for a £250 million profit by 1984. Given that, it's expected the city will flock to invest their money. But there's no chance of that coming before the next election.
More gales are on their way tonight after the high winds and heavy rain which brought widespread flooding and a spate of accidents and injuries. Fallen trees blocked roads, power lines were brought down and roofs were blown off. At Heathrow Airport, an empty Boeing airliner was lifted by a gust of wind and turned through 90 degrees. Mainline trains were halted at Colchester when a cycle shed full of bicycles was blown onto the line. In mid-Wales, the flooding meant cycling was one of the few ways of getting about. The River Dyfi overflowed its banks, leaving hundreds of acres of farmland underwater, nearly 3 feet deep. But there were no reports of livestock being endangered. The threat of serious flooding receded during the day, although some roads remained closed to all but heavy traffic and car drivers were forced to make long detours. At Hixton in Staffordshire, the roof of a school was blown off by 70-mile-an-hour winds. 300 children were due to return to Broadacres School tomorrow morning, but it's likely to be some time before classes can resume. Officials say they don't yet know how much it will cost to repair the 23-year-old building. The gymnasium, staff room and library were also damaged. Warsaw Pact leaders are holding their first summit for more than 2 years, and the threat of nuclear war is high on their agenda. The meeting is taking place in the Czechoslovak capital Prague, amid an almost total news blackout, but it's understood that East-West relations and armament questions are among the main topics for discussion. Our Europe correspondent, Tim Sebastian, assesses the importance of this summit.
Communist leaders have chosen Prague as their platform and nuclear arms as their theme. The summit in this city formally puts control of the Warsaw Pact into the hands of Mr. Andropov. He'll use it to stamp the new authority on his allies. Mr. Brezhnev was remembered with a minute's silence, but these are not sentimental people, and their concern is more with the problems that Mr. Brezhnev left them. Poland's leader, General Jaruzelski, is a reminder of unfinished business Unusually today, he was displaying civilian credentials. Delegates let him chair the opening session, a rare sign of their approval for his actions. The meeting is expected to do at least two things: encourage the peace movements in the West and discourage NATO from deploying more weapons. If nothing else, the war of propaganda is being stepped up.
The Israelis are claiming that 2 bases are being built in Syria for Soviet SA-5 ground-to-air missiles, a weapon never before seen outside the USSR. The Americans tonight said the missiles could threaten Israeli radar, planes, fighters and fighter bombers inside Israeli airspace. In the Lebanese city of Tripoli, fighting between pro- and anti-Syrian factions has continued, and at least 30 people have been killed in the past 24 hours. The actress Elizabeth Taylor, on her peace tour of the Middle East, has been to see the Israeli leader, Mr. Begin. She wore a neck brace and had a bandaged leg following a car accident last Saturday. Mr. Begin told her he had high hopes of peace in Lebanon. Miss Taylor then went to a children's hospital. Despite her injuries, she's due to fly to Beirut tomorrow to meet Lebanon's president and to visit Israeli troops. Anti-British demonstrations in Argentina on the 150th anniversary of the start of British rule in the Falklands. The Argentine government is stepping up its diplomatic campaign to get sovereignty over the islands, but some opposition politicians say another invasion shouldn't be ruled out. Earlier, though, a group of veterans from the Falklands War demonstrated against what they called their poor leadership during the conflict and their bad treatment by the authorities after it. As part of their protest, they ostentatiously turned their backs on the presidential palace in Buenos Aires. In Zimbabwe, motorists' lives are continuing to revolve around the desperate search for petrol. The country has been short of fuel since their supplies in Mozambique were blown up by saboteurs. Philip Hayton reports on how people are coping with the shortage.
6 o'clock in the morning and the rush for fuel is on. Many people organize their lives around the petrol queue. Some park their cars in a queue 3 days before petrol goes on sale. Others sleep in their cars overnight, while some push their cars for nearly 2 hours to find the station that is open. About 400 drivers formed a line a mile long in this Harare suburb. In the end, they were rewarded with a ration of about £5 worth of fuel. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the emergency regulations say the pumps must shut down. It's the thankless and sometimes dangerous job of the garage owner to tell some of his customers they won't be served.
Only got 3 minutes to go.
Fights and scuffles have broken out, so this proprietor now employs 2 security guards. How long have you been waiting?
Just about 2.5 hours now. I'm exhausted.
You're pushing your car. What are you going to do now that you've been set?
Just got to wait until they open again.
Well, it's 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe's fuel tanks are almost dry because saboteurs blew up a fuel depot in Mozambique at the end of Zimbabwe's oil pipeline. Mr. Mugabe blames it all on South Africa's campaign to destabilize his country, but Pretoria denies the charge. South Africa professes a policy of good neighborliness, so she's offered to let Zimbabwe have some fuel, but only if a Zimbabwe government minister negotiates the deal. And that seems to be too high a political price for Mr. Mugabe's government, which has broken off diplomatic relations with Pretoria and campaigns against its apartheid policies. As Zimbabwe ekes out her meager fuel supplies, some drivers are doing their bit by carrying extra passengers. Others rely on horsepower to do daily errands. Some businessmen are using up their Christmas surplus of calories and carbohydrates to beat the shortage of other energy.
England's cricketers will spend tomorrow's rest day at Sydney knowing they need an early breakthrough to win the match and save the Ashes. Australia are 167 on with 7 wickets in hand. But, as Michael Blakey reports, England have proved they can fight back, led by the example of Derek Randall.
He made this third day look like a one-day match as he launched himself into the fray with a courageous display of strokes. He outscored Gower as the pair put on a 100 partnership in 100 minutes. The situation may have been desperate, it didn't worry Randall. He took the pace of Thompson, bowling his first over to remove him. Yardley hurt his hand and retired from the gully. his place was taken by Wessels.
It's in the air, he's gone.
The catch couldn't have been easier, and Botham was out for 5. David Gower made a majestic 70. He had to survive 2 more balls before lunch. For him in this series, a dangerous moment.
It's gone. He's caught him. What a ripper.
The catch by Chappell was a stunner. England were 169 for 6. After a 50 partnership by Miller and Hemmings, Thompson was bowling flat out. And another amazing catch, this time by Border, saw the end of Willis. Australia's overall lead was 100 when their catching was matched by Gower.
There's an edge and a very good left-hand catch.
Dyson was out for 2. The fielding's been superb. Randall got rid of Chappell with an aerial display like something out of the Red Arrows.
He runs against us. Gorset's in the air and he's gone. Beautiful catch. Well taken that by Randall.
Wessels made 53, and by then the lead was 159.
Very close. Big shouts. He's out, yes.
The switch from all-out spin to Botham had worked. The day ended in controversy as the fielders appealed for a catch off the boot of Hughes, but it was denied. At the close, Australia were 90 for 3, and the lead is 167.
And there'll be live coverage of the cricket by satellite from Sydney tomorrow night on BBC One, when Sports Night will be extended to show play from midnight until 2 o'clock on Thursday morning. And depending on the result of the play, there could be a further extension of the coverage. There's one sucker result this evening. In the First Division, West Ham 2, Luton Town 3. 6 leading Catholic churchmen from England and Scotland have arrived in Northern Ireland for talks with Cardinal Tommaso Fee, the Primate of all Ireland. It's the first time the Catholic leaders have stayed in the province, and it's understood that they'll discuss all aspects of church life. James Robbins saw the Scottish delegation arrive.
When the 3 Scots bishops arrived at Belfast Airport, Cardinal O'Fee, the Irish Primate, was there to greet them. He's eager to play down suggestions this is an ecclesiastical summit on Northern Ireland. Yet the visitors from England and Wales, as well as Scotland, are eager to discuss a way forward and to hear of the Cardinal's alarm about recent shootings by security forces of alleged terrorist suspects.
But I don't think that is official British policy. I don't think it ever has been. I don't think it ever will be. If it were to be, it will be most regrettable.
Tomorrow's discussion of social as well as political issues will be private. The fact that the Catholic hierarchies from both sides of the Irish Sea have now come together for the first time and have done so in Northern Ireland is seen here as having greater significance than the Church will so far admit.
From today onwards, the pop charts are being compiled by Gallup, the pollsters better known for assessing political trends. By using a computer system, they hope to eliminate chart rigging by unscrupulous record promoters. Gary Lloyd reports.
It's the chart toppers who get the airtime and do much in the multi-million-pound music business to influence the customers. Many record producers who aspire to topping the pops are well known for offering free gifts as inducements to record shops to push their latest numbers. Now the Gallup organisation, better known for political polls than popular music, have introduced a system they say will help outwit attempts to rig the charts. Selected record shops like this will be linked electronically to a computer. It will show where and at what time a record was sold. Gallup say they can analyse any irregularities, inspect dealers' books, and if necessary, sack them from their system.
It would be wrong to say any system is foolproof. What we try to do is make it difficult for the people to hype the charts, make it expensive for them to do it, and principally enable us to identify when it's being done.
And indeed it is time for a rundown of the complete and brand new Britain's Top 40 as compiled by Gallup.
A new pop chart made its debut today.